Hi, and welcome to the Alive and Sometimes Well podcast, a trauma informed business ish podcast for folks who see life as art and on all things business, relationships, and mental health. I'm Alyssa Pressman, a licensed therapist, certified coach, and space holder for space holders, creatives, entrepreneurs, and magic makers.
And I'm Rachel Turner, a trauma-informed business coach for misfits, artists, and creatives.
And today we are getting into and talking all things living life and running a business, or even just working during a pandemic that is still happening. And especially now with the variant, there's a lot of collective anxiety and fear and anger and all of the feelings. So there's been a lot of conversations for a while about getting back to normal. These conversations have been going on for months now. And honestly, we're wondering, what the fuck does that even mean? And what does it look like? What does it look like to continue living through unprecedented moments of time in our lifetime? And like, how does it even look to live and to work when half the time or all of the time you feel like, what the fuck is even happening? And what is the point of everything? So that is what we are going to be getting into today. But first,
we're going to go into our highs and lows.
yes.
Yes. Okay. I've been thinking about this. What are my highs and lows?
What are they? Give them to us.
Okay. So I've been having just like a terrible time with my digestion. Just like my stomach is in a constant state of distension 24/7.
Yes. Okay.
Just
That has
like
to be so uncomfortable.
it's miserable. I used to have like breaks and then I would have small flare-ups, but now I've just been in like one large flare-up for the past like 6 months, which I think is like very on par with what we're talking about today.
Yeah.
But it's actually my high is that I found someone on Instagram through a client of mine who's already been seeing this person, and I had my first session with her last week on like what's going on with my guts and like how I'm going to support my guts. And she was like so sweet, so kind, so knowledgeable, and I felt like for the first time in a while like we have like a moment of like everything's going to be okay. Yeah.
Yes, that's like, it's like that to me, those kinds of things are full body exhales, because when you have health stuff, and especially chronic things, and as soon as you say the word flare up, my body is like gets tense, because that's what I call when my chronic illness gets activated, is like a flare up. And that can be a range from I'm mildly uncomfortable to I'm in absolutely debilitating pain and can't function. And so to go to somebody, it's very vulnerable to go to someone with your health and your pain and your discomfort and say, can you help me? Or are you going to make me feel shittier about this?
Yes, well, especially because I was seeing someone prior who I kind of ghosted.
Yeah,
Um,
it happens.
because it just like it wasn't a good fit at all. It was just like I was like another person like in her like group of clients, and it did not feel good at all. Um, so this feels really good. I feel like excited. I'm taking all my new like herbs and things that was recommended. Oh, also, you inspired me to stop drinking coffee.
What?
Yeah.
Tell me
I just
more.
like, I forget you were saying something about how you don't drink coffee, and I didn't know this about you. And occasionally, like a handful of times a year, I'll just like stop drinking coffee. Like my body's just like, no, we're not doing that anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't have one of those moments again, but I was wondering like if the coffee was like contributing to my flare-ups. And then you told me about your experience, and I was just like off the cuff. So like now I'm just on tea.
I love this for you. Yeah, I
Yeah.
can't. So for people listening, my chronic illness, one of my huge there's like trigger foods and drinks, and I cannot have caffeine, like no caffeine. So no coffee. And strangely, Chris also doesn't drink coffee, which people in
Oh, wow.
residency are like, how are you doing this? And whenever we tell people like, oh yeah, we don't drink caffeine or coffee, they're like, you're really out here just like living raw. Like you're just
Yeah.
letting life like
Raw
pummel
dogging
the shit
life.
out of you too.
Yeah.
Like you're raw dogging it. And I'm like, yeah, I really get, we don't have the stimulants. Like we're really out here just like
Doing it.
in our exhaustion, just like trudging through, I guess. Okay. So no coffee. This is exciting. How do you feel?
I feel good, especially because when my meds are being changed from my bipolar to, I was like in an extreme state of exhaustion.
Yeah.
And I was really using coffee. Like I was abusing coffee. Like before I just drank it because I truly enjoyed it. Like it was nice. I like the ritual of it. But then I was like really abusing coffee and like drinking like a disgusting amount a day just to like make it through the day.
Yeah.
And so I'm feeling good. I love tea. I'm having a great time. I'm making a London fog for breakfast for my
Fancy.
for my breakfast drink. Um, and so it's good. So that's my high.
I love
Um,
those.
my low is that okay, so I filed an extension for my taxes because I was like overwhelmed when we when they were due, and I just asked my accountant if we could file an extension. And he's so kind. Like I didn't file my taxes for a handful of years in the beginning of my business because I couldn't afford to pay my taxes. I was homeless for a while. And so like my taxes were like the least of my concern. Um, and so when I eventually was able to pay my taxes, I owed back taxes, and I was like just in like a barrel of shame because I'm like, oh my God, like bad things are going to happen. I did something really terrible. I don't know how to navigate any of this. Like I'm a business owner. I should know more. And I found this accountant who's this like lovely man in Indiana. He's the sweetest guy. He does not make me feel bad at all. But I finished my taxes last night with Sarah's help, who like truly is like the greatest gem in the whole entire world. So that should be a high. Like it should be a high that I finished my taxes, but it like puts me in a state of like just like severe anxiety. Like I'm just like swimming in anxiety right now,
Mhm.
and it does not feel good. Like I know that it like they have it, which feels like the hardest part now, but then it's like paying for it and getting caught up on this year. Like I just do not enjoy this.
You have like an anxiety hangover.
I do. I do. I'm like, I feel like I'm in a pool of anxiety, and I'm just like, it's like sludge, and I'm just like sludging through it, like trying to like float.
Yes, I feel you. It's so stressful. It's so anxiety inducing, especially when you work for yourself and you can't just submit like, your forms from your employer and that's kind of over and done with. I also like did taxes for the first time for my business this year. And it can be very confusing to do when you're just like, here's all my income. It's in all these different places. What the fuck am I doing?
I
And
know.
it's not like a simple form that you have from your employer that you just like shoot off. You're like, wait. If I don't report that, am I going to go to jail?
Oh my
Like,
God, I know. Well, when Sarah and I got together, I had to tell her, like, I was convinced I was going to jail. Like, I truly, like, I believed it to be true that I was going to jail. And I was like, Sarah, I have to tell you something. And she's like, what? And I'm like, I think I'm gonna go to jail.
you're like telling her, you're like, will you wait for me?
And she's like, Rachel, like, you're fine. They have much bigger fish to fry. Like, you're like getting caught up. Like, it's totally fine. But yeah, it's a high and a low. It's everything at once. So I'm just feeling the full scale of human emotions like in this exact moment in time. In fact, we had to like re-record the podcast because when we were when we were introing, I just forgot how to speak for a second because I was just like really in it.
Well, and also I feel like when we first got on this call to get ready, I brought a lot of anxious energy that I didn't even realize and like threw it at Rachel just by existing. So we had to like take a moment because I was like, hold on, I need to sit back in my chair and like calm the fuck down for a second. It is way too early in the morning for this level of like
Yeah.
intensity.
Yeah. We're
I
we're
love
making
us.
it through though.
I love us
Yeah.
so much. We're figuring it
Me
out.
too.
Okay. My high is Chris and I started watching the current season, the UK version of Love Island.
Okay.
And this is like it's a whole thing, this show. So actually, we watched it for the first time like 2 years ago, like fall of 2019. Chris and I were going through what our therapist at that time helped us understand it as like a relationship detox, is what she called it. I don't like that word because of diet culture, but almost like everything was coming up to be dealt with. Like we were just in one of those periods when you're in a
Mm,
relationship with someone long enough where like every conversation is spiky and like turns into an argument. Like it doesn't matter what
yeah.
it is. You're just like everyone's tender and raw. And we like could not have conversations without like it turning into these like giant fights where you're just standing there like, what the fuck are we even fighting about? And our therapist was, really being supportive of us. And there were so many life changes getting ready to happen. And I was really struggling with them. And it was just too much happening at once at that point. And I was so overwhelmed and stressed and it was really playing out in the relationship. Our therapist was really great. But one of the things that got us through that period was watching the show Love Island.
I
that
love that.
I know, like, it's just not stuff you imagine. Like, people are like staring into each other's eyes for 10 minutes straight, like holding each other's hearts. Like, that is lovely. Those are nice practices. But you know what really saved us is watching fucking Love Island UK. I forget what
Yeah.
season it was. And because it was like our safe space where we watched that show, we didn't fight about anything. We just took absolute pleasure and delight in the shenanigans of it and the drama of it and the ridiculousness of it. And we could have conversations like after about different people. We'd like pause it while we are watching. And it was like our safe space as a couple. Like, no arguments are
Yeah.
allowed to happen here. So we started watching the current season. And it's just so ridiculous that it's very enjoyable. So that's a high.
I love that so much.
Yeah. And then also then we'll like try and talk to each other in accents, which I won't even try because I can't do any accents. Anytime I do it, I like mash 7 different ones together and I sound really scary. So I'm not even going to do it for anyone. I'm not brave enough to, but we have a good time with it. And then my other high though is that I am home. I'm at my family's house
Yeah.
right now. And that is such a high because um, my family's just lovely and they're like taking care of me and they're feeding me. And this kind of goes into what we're even talking about, but like the last year to even just feed myself, like I'm like, I
Mm.
have to eat several times a day. Like, what am I even going to eat? I don't have capacity to like make things. Like, it just, even eating became like overwhelming for me. So to get to come home and like there's food or someone's always cooking something or someone's like, I'll get takeout. I don't even have to think about what I want. I'm just like, yeah, great. Oh, it's like heaven. And it just reminds
Yes.
me, there's like a part of me that goes like, oh my God, I'm so spoiled. Or this is like such ridiculous. Like, I'm an adult. I need to be able to take care of myself. And then I'm like, whoa, whoa, whoa. I'm like alone all of the time when I'm in Texas. And actually, I can feel it in my bones that we're meant to be living in a communal way where we're like
Absolutely.
sharing and tending to each other and taking care of each other all the time. That this is actually the more natural state to exist in. And I am existing in isolation out of just circumstances and necessity when I'm not back in North Carolina. And that is the abnormality, not this. And so it feels really
Yeah.
nice to be like taken care of. So those are like my highs. They're wonderful.
That's beautiful. I can't wait to meet your family. They just seem so wonderful.
Oh my gosh, my mom actually just said the other day, she was like, I just want to like give Rachel a hug. My mom is a
Oh,
Cancer mom, like her sun sign is Cancer. And that is okay. If anyone's not into astrology, I know it can be like people who hate astrology hate it. They're like very upset when I talk about
yeah.
it. But Cancers are like, they're like the mother of the zodiac. So my mom being a Cancer mom, she wants to mother the
Mm.
shit out of everybody. Like my friends call her Mama Pressman and like she is the ultimate mother. Like when I look at her, I'm like, I could never parent like her. She gets so much fulfillment out of being a mother. And I'm like, no, thank you. But I really admire her for it. It's amazing. So she just wants to give you a hug and she wants to meet you so badly. So we're gonna make this
I
happen.
can't wait. I can't
It's,
wait.
it's gonna be great. So yeah, those are my highs. Oh, I didn't do my low yet. I was like ready to bypass my low
Yeah.
entirely and like block it out.
What
Okay.
is it?
My low right now is that I am hitting like peak lows as far as feelings. Like
Mm.
I am really Rachel experienced it in the first few minutes of this call. I am feeling a bit untethered and my energy right now feels like it's just like vibrating with anxiety. Like my
Mm.
anxiety, I deal with anxiety and I have for many years, but right now it's been feeling very much activated and I have been struggling to get grounded. Like I've been struggling. And it's one of those things where when you're anxious, you know, like here's the things I need to do, but being so anxious makes those things feel even harder to do.
Yeah.
So I've been really struggling with anxiety and just feeling like a lot of residual sadness, grief, and heartbreak is coming up for me lately. Like old stuff is resurfacing. And it used to be really confusing for me when those feelings would come up of like pain and grief and sadness. And I'd be like, what even is this about? That happened X amount of years ago. Like I'm done with it or I should be over it. And then as I got older, I realized, oh, I don't experience time as linear when it comes to like
Mm.
my heart or my relationships or situations or things that were really a big deal for me. And so once I understood that about myself, I was like, oh, things are cyclical for me. They like come up to be dealt with at different points. It's not, the stages of grief that people talk about that, and I used to work as a grief therapist, they were not meant to go through in a linear order. And of course, our culture took that and ran with it. They are a lot of times co-current. They happen at the same time, or you cycle through them over and over and over. So when I started understanding, like, that's how I live my whole life. I don't live it linear, but our culture really is like, there's a beginning, a middle, and an end, and that's it. It can feel really confusing. So I've just been letting myself move through all of my very intense and like oftentimes really low feelings in the last few weeks have been really activated. So that's been low because that's just been hard because I don't want to feel sad. And I don't want to feel grief. Like that shit sucks.
So what do you do when you feel like that?
Cry. I used to judge myself and like try and like shake it off and be like, no, like we're not doing that. Like that's over and done with. But what I'm doing now is being tender with myself. And I will go to someone safe in my life and be like, I'm actually feeling heartbroken about XYZ. Someone who won't be like, that was so long ago, or you can't worry, that who will just like hold me tenderly and be like, of course you feel sad. That makes sense. And I cry and I write a lot, like I journal it out. So I'll like write letters to myself or to other people that I don't send. And a lot of crying, and a lot of like laying, and also moving my body. Also screaming in the car. Do that a lot. Favorite place to
I
scream.
love all the ways that you take care of yourself.
Thank you. I got really sweaty talking about it.
You did a great job.
Thank you, Rachel.
You're welcome.
For a second, I forgot that this is going public. I thought it's just me and you right now, but it's not. But I feel good about it. This is an honest share.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
It's beautiful.
Yeah. So, okay. So we hit y'all with our highs and lows. So casually, I'm just going to like move right on.
And here we go.
And here we go. Okay. But truly, let's get into, honestly, that really transitions well into what we're even talking about today. Because so how we even got to talking about this, I mean, this conversation, Rachel, I feel like you've done such a good job, like you and Sarah and y'all's business, of like really talking through this the whole time. About like what's been going on and addressing things as they're happening and not like bypassing this shit, which I've really appreciated. Because Rachel and I have been having conversations around like living and working through a pandemic, because I launched my business in July 2020, like a few months into the pandemic, thinking that the pandemic wasn't going to last that much longer. Like I really thought by the fall it would be over. Like I just didn't know or understand. And I didn't realize, like, first of all, going into entrepreneurship or like working for yourself is like one of the most fucked experiences I've ever had in my life. I don't know how else to describe it except so fucked up. And like on one hand, I love it so much, but on the other, I'm like, what? Most of the time I'm walking around like, what the fuck is going on? And actually the other day, I need to have him tell me exactly what he said. Chris said to me, he just like turned to me on the couch, was like, it's so exciting to watch you like in entrepreneurship. And I was like, what do you mean? He's like, well, like on one day you are just like so low, you like feel so depressed and you're like, what is the point of everything? Like, what the fuck am I even doing? Like, I'm so low. Like, I don't even know what's going on. He's like, and the next day you have like 5 new clients. And like the next day you're like, I'm starting a podcast, and you're like working on the cover art for like 6 hours, and then you launch it. And then 2 days later, you're like, I don't know, maybe I should just go work at a therapy practice again. I don't know what the fuck I'm doing. He's like, it's so exciting. And I'm like, did you hear what you just said? I was like, that's a roller coaster that I'm on all the time. Like the highs are really high, but my God, the lows are low. So that being said, working for yourself, working at all, laboring at all, period, is an intense and it's a lot. Working for yourself is like a whole different mind fuck. And then doing it through a pandemic, it does sometimes. There's so many times I'm like, what is the point of anything? So that's how we really got, this has been a conversation Rachel and I have been having privately in like Voxer. I'm messaging you like, what the fuck am I even doing? I can't function today. And I've just really appreciated how you've talked about this continuously, both publicly and then in like your small group containers and in your one-on-one work, really honoring this and not being like, yeah, there's a pandemic, but anyways, let's get back to like your launch plan,
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that you say that, because I definitely feel like in the beginning of the pandemic, so I think I said this on the last episode, but my Nana died on March 3rd, right before the pandemic, and she raised me. She wasn't just like my grandma. And so I feel like there was the grief of my Nana's death, and then then the world shut down. And I remember vividly when my best friend, she called me and she was like, I love you, but you need to go to the grocery store and get enough food for 2 weeks. She worked in the emergency room. And it was the day before the shutdown.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, having been homeless before and not having access to food, I constantly panic about not having enough food. Like my house looks a little bit ridiculous. Like there's always a lot of food in the freezer and we always have like a lot of like dry food because I'm always like in the back of my head worried about like what if something bad happens. And so I remember going back to the grocery store and getting more food makes me like very emotional.
Yeah.
And I was just met with and then I remember everyone like running through the aisles. Like people were
Yes.
like running through the aisles. And I was so stressed out. I felt like my worst nightmare was like happening. And I remember just like grabbing all of this food and taking it home, and like we didn't even have room for all of the food. Um and it brought up I have a history of an eating disorder.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was like on top of like this fear of like, what if we don't eat? It was also this like eating disorder thoughts on top of that, on top of like my Nana just dying. And then now the world is ending. And I just remember like vaulting myself into my clients. So like we were holding all of the space, like anything that was happening in the world, like we were doing a call on it for our clients. We were doing extra calls. We were doing seminars and workshops, not like leading the change on what was happening in the world, but just like holding space for people. But there was none of that for myself. Like I wasn't I wasn't caring for myself. I wasn't tending to my needs. I wasn't being kind to myself. I was just bulldozing everything. And I had this eating disorder come back up to the top, that while I wasn't actively acting on, I had a binge eating disorder. While I wasn't actively binging, I was doing everything else. I was lying. I was manipulating people. I was eating in secret. I was doing all of these things. And it just felt like I got to this point, and I shared this on the last episode, where I had this client who was a nurse and she was telling me how she was trying to resuscitate someone. And I just like burst into tears because I realized it was the first time that I hadn't held any space for myself. And I think back to the last year and a half, and I still think about it now. Like, I think I'm doing a little bit better. I'm in therapy twice a week on the recommendation of my therapist, I think specifically for this. But how much I bulldozed the year, and I bulldozed the year to hold space for other people, but I couldn't hold that same space for myself.
Do you think that you were doing that as a way to not have to sit with yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that yeah, I mean, I think it's always been hard to sit with my own things. I mean, as an avoidant person, that's always been a challenge for me.
Yeah.
And then this year, with everything compiling, like one thing on top of the other, on top of the other. And even now, it still feels like the pandemic doesn't feel like over for me. It doesn't feel like we're like starting a new normal. It doesn't feel like we are recuperating from anything. It feels like I'm actively as in it now as I was like March 13th. And that's why I'm so glad that we're doing this episode, because I don't feel like there's been any space to talk about that. I feel like people say that they want to talk about this,
Mm-hmm.
but they don't talk about it.
Yeah. By just
Um,
mentioning that they want to, it's like, check, I talked about it. And it's like, it's a brief side mention. But, anyways, back to our regularly scheduled programming.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
yeah, so it's been I constantly think about like how I was talking to my therapist on Friday, and or I'm just talking about all the heavy things today, but I was telling her like how thankful I was for her and how like I really didn't think I was going to make it. And she was like, I didn't think you were going to make it either. And I was like, to
Oh my
hear someone
God.
like echo back like how close my life was like on the line,
Yeah.
I just like I don't know how we survived the last year and a half.
Yeah. That's it's like on one hand that has to be super like validating and affirming of how low you were feeling to have a professional, like a therapist reflect that to you
Yeah.
like, yeah, I also wasn't sure you were going to make it. It's very honest.
Yeah. I mean, she's fantastic. I love my therapist. Like she's so human and validating, and like she really brought awareness to. I remember one of my clients who turned into a friend. We were talking, she's also a therapist, and she
Are
was
you
telling
talking
me,
about me right now?
no.
I'm just kidding.
I do have a lot of clients and friends who are also therapists.
I love that.
Me too. And I remember telling her, she was talking about anxiety, and I was like, well, maybe I could talk to her about how I'm feeling. And I didn't even realize my anxiety was anxiety. I didn't realize that like I was suffering.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that like I knew that like my life, it felt like it sucked and it felt hard, but I didn't realize I was suffering.
Yeah. Like you get so used to it. It's just like your baseline normal. And
Yeah.
sometimes it takes someone on the outside being like, no, it's not supposed to be like this, or doesn't need to be like, you don't need to suffer like this. And you're like, oh
Yeah.
shit. Okay. No, you're right.
Yeah. And then we take like running a business on top of that. Like I thought my business was going to end. I've never like, oh my God. I remember I had this client who quit. She had just signed up. We were about a month in, and she messaged me, and she had like signed a contract and everything. And she just messaged me. She was like, I'm done. Goodbye. And
Oh shit.
there was like no communication after that. Like she was like, fuck a
Shit.
contract.
Shit. And oh my God, that's so
And so
stressful.
I remember like calling my coach in tears, and I'm like, is every single one of my clients going to quit? Like I'm going to be homeless again. Like
Mm.
what that's going to be. And so like, I don't think we've talked about how we're navigating, like we're not just signing clients anymore. Like we're not just like posting on Instagram. Like these are our lifelines. Like these are like this is how we're surviving. And the weight that we put on ourselves, and then the weight that the business industry puts on top of us to have a business, to run our business, to pivot. I mean, how many times did we hear the word pivot? Oh my God, I
Yeah.
never want to hear that word again.
Yeah, I know.
Um, and which is fine. Like a lot of us did have to like pivot our business, but then people took it as like a marketing ploy, like
Yeah.
realizing that people needed to pivot. So like that became like the marketing like agenda at the time was to pivot and to get people to invest in you. And it was just like one big MLM. Um, but like talking
Love
about
a
the
good
weight,
MLM.
right? Like
Just kidding.
the weight of entrepreneurship on all of us and where suffering has lived. You know, I just asked my Instagram audience this morning, like what burnout felt like for them. And they were all just describing, like, I was like, my memory was poor. I had brain fog. I was sick. Like, I was ill. Like, I was physically
Hmm.
sick.
Hmm.
And just like the amount of clients I had who were physically sick this year. And like, no one talked about that. Like, no one was talking about how we were just like sick. Like, did you experience any flare ups because of COVID?
You know what? Amazingly, I did not. I like I
Oh,
did
that's
have
good.
moments of like increased discomfort, but for me, a flare up, when I really think if I'm calling it that, for me, it really tends to mean debilitating. Like I am an animal primal because I'm in so much pain that I can't
Mm,
even access my brain. And I didn't. I kept waiting for it to happen, but you know what did get super fucked was my period, like my menstrual cycle.
same.
It was so jacked up, and it's pretty wild because I take birth control. And I a few years ago I wanted to come off of it. I was like, I just want to like bleed naturally. I got like kind of sucked into like the spiritual white women community for a minute, which is like a very dangerous place. It's scary in there. Don't go
Yeah.
there. Um, but like I was like, I just want to bleed naturally. And I'm still a little bit of a hippie. Like when I'm going to scare someone by saying this, but I'm just fuck it. When Chris and I were originally going to have our wedding in April 2020, I had been, okay, I'm just going to say it. I had been
Okay.
collecting my menstrual blood and I was going to dehydrate it and turn it into powder to use as a ritual secretly in the wedding for myself. Okay. So, like,
I love
I
that.
love a wild, I have a very, I look a certain way, but I have a very like primal nature where I'm like, I want
Yes.
to like, this is like, anyways, I was going to make it even weird. I'm just going to leave it at that.
Wait, no, wait, you can't. How are
Okay.
you
Like
collecting it? Did
okay,
you use a
I was
cup?
using it. Yeah. Menstrual cup.
Okay, got it.
And I would
That makes
collect it
sense.
and I would collect it and I would literally put it in the back of my fridge. It's just so bad. And
No, it's great.
I have a friend who is like a professional pastry chef. And I was like, how can I turn liquid blood into powder? And she was like telling me what we would bake it in the oven at a certain degree and it turned to powder. And I remember telling this to my mom, who was horrified. And she was like, if you are like sprinkling this around where you're doing the ceremony, like people cannot know, like no one can know that you're doing this. It will terrify them. And I'm like, yeah, like I get it. I get it. And so I was like, how am I going to secretly like sprinkle stuff like without anyone seeing me? They're gonna be like, what are you doing? But I was like, this is really important to me. Like the blood is powerful. So, anyways, all of that to say that like I can be really fucking weird. Um, and so like I'm really into like my menstrual cycle and all of these things. And so I'm on birth control for health reasons. I have to be. So I don't have to, I don't want to say it like that, but with my BRCA1 mutation, my
Mhm.
risk of breast cancer was super high, but also ovarian cancer.
Yeah.
And my oncologist was like, hey, one of the ways we're going to keep your ovaries protected is keep you on hormonal birth control.
Okay.
It's one of the best things you can do to protect your ovaries from ovarian cancer. Um, so I'm on it and I would like to not be on it and to just like free bleed all over the world, like really
Yeah.
gross hippie stuff. But I'm on it. So I was actually shocked at over this last year plus at this point, we're going in a year and a half, right? Something
Mhm.
at how much my menstrual cycle was like, yeah, fuck this birth control. And I was just like having periods to me were random, but I think it was like very much stress induced. And it was like my
Yeah.
body's way of responding to how much stress was happening. And having a period does kick up it does irritate my chronic illness. So I can always
Okay.
kind of feel like, why is my pelvis really inflamed and my bones hurt and my pussy hurts? And like, I'm like, did I eat something? And it's like, no. Then my period comes and I'm like, fuck. But that's made me feel really dysregulated, right? Because I get very emotional leading up to it. I get really low or I get angry, like all of the things.
Yeah.
So that's for me, that's how it manifested in my body this last year. I really noticed that, like, okay, I wasn't flaring from my chronic illness, but my period was jacked up. Like I was like having cycles and I still am. Like I'm having a cycle right now that's very intense. And I just stopped having a period a week and a half ago. Like it
Oh,
shouldn't be
wow.
happening. And it's still going on. So yeah.
I mean, just like, and I know I remember we talked about this a couple months ago, but like the effects of COVID are going to last for lifetimes.
Yes, you and I did talk about this. Okay, here's the thing I want to tell everybody. And I don't, because I sometimes people are like, am I out of my mind for how I'm feeling that this is impacting me so intensively? Like I see other people just like living life normally. Number one, no, there's nothing wrong with you. Number two, we don't know what's going on behind closed doors. Like most people are not going to put what a difficult time, they're not going to share that. They're going to share themselves like having dinner outside with their friends, and they're not going to show themselves crying on a bathroom floor, having anxiety about being out in public or seeing friends or trying to interact in the world again. And the other thing we have to remember is like, when you look at somebody and it seems like they're totally fine and they've gone through this whole pandemic and they've just been working as usual and like pretty much living life as usual, and they're kind of looking at you sideways when you're like, this has been really hard, it's not for you, and they're like, not really, my life hasn't changed. Okay, you cannot base, if you are a person who feels things deeply and cares, you cannot look at other people that are like really good at bypassing things. Like there
Right.
are, right, there's people that like do not know how to feel their feelings and they aren't in touch with that part of themselves, and they bypass things as much as possible. And we're not judging those people, like this is not to judge them or be shady towards them. Like some people, for all kinds of reasons, like whether it's their childhood, how they were raised, trauma, they cannot be with hard things, they cannot deal with it, they cannot address it, they cannot feel their feelings, like they're not going to do it, they don't have capacity. You do not want to compare yourselves to those people. Okay. If you're having a hard time, your hard time is very human. It makes a lot of sense. We are in a thing that none of us have lived through in our lifetimes before. And the effects of this are going to be passed down generationally. It's going to change the way we live forever. And I know when I talk like that, sometimes people like roll their eyes. But if you talk to anyone in like the mental health profession, anyone in the fields of space holding for people, this is going to change the way we live forever. We're not even going to know yet the impacts of this time in life has had on, kids that were born during this time, the mass, like there's so many things that are going to come out of this,
Yeah.
and people do not want to deal with that because it is very uncomfortable. That's why we're hearing back to normal, back to normal. Like there's so many people dead just in this country, not even looking at the entire world. And people are like, let's get back to normal. And I'm like, what the fuck are you talking about?
Yeah.
So, no, there's nothing wrong with anyone that's really struggling with this. And if you're feeling so activated with anxiety with the variant and like panic is coming up for you, that makes fucking sense. That makes sense.
Absolutely. I echo exactly what you just said. Like, there's just, I think that all of the ways that we feel are so valid. It makes so much sense. And I think it's hard when we see people. I had a client specifically who was like, who was avoidant and a conductor in their leadership designs, which means that their core need is control.
Yeah.
And they're a very avoidant in nature. And I remember they said, I'm just really bored of talking about COVID. Like, can we talk about something else now? I'm totally fine. Like, can we stop talking about how this might be hard for people? And I'm just like, oh God, like, I wish that you could make the space to like talk about like what's coming up for you. But like, we see people like that. And even, and it's hard not to compare ourselves. And one of
Yeah.
the questions that I've been asked the most is, how have you been able to produce so much content the last year and a half? People ask me that a lot.
Okay.
Like a lot. I get asked that because I openly talk about being depressed, but then I also post 3 times a day.
Yeah.
And so people are like, something doesn't add up here. And I'm like, this is a trauma response, friend. Like, I'm like, this is not, and not always. Like, I love writing and I
Yeah.
love like telling my truth is like telling the truth is like a core value of mine. So it's not like that's not always that, but like it is so. For a large part of it was like a large trauma response was to just keep going and keep doing and I wasn't tending to my own needs,
Yes.
which feels really sad. I feel sad about that.
Yes. It really is for a lot of people, I think can relate to this of like when something is going on and it's so overwhelming, we throw ourselves into stuff like out. People will throw themselves into work. They'll throw themselves into the relationship. They'll throw themselves into just focusing on their kids and like everything outside of yourself. Because as soon as if you slow down or stop, all the things are going to come up to be dealt with. And it feels like crushing and overwhelming. So we avoid it for as long as possible.
Yeah.
Um, and like I will joke all the time. I'll be like, if someone's like, I'm like, that person needs therapy and they're like training for a triathlon and they're like training for like 6 marathons. And I'm like, anything to avoid sitting down and talking about feelings. Like we see people doing
Mhm.
that all the time. There's so many ways people can cope, but it can be really hard to sit with ourselves. So I have a lot of understanding and compassion, and we've never gone through something like this. And like, I know for me, so I moved to Houston from North Carolina with Chris for his job. He started residency in July 2020.
Mhm.
And I knew first of all, residency is super intense. I knew it was going to be hard moving to a city where we didn't have family or friends. I knew all these things were going to be hard. And then we did it in the midst of the pandemic, and the pandemic just kept going and going and going. And it ended up being the longest I had gone without seeing my family, without seeing anyone I loved. I have never spent so much time alone in my entire life. And I am a person who needs a lot of alone time to recharge. And I was hitting such low points. I had never been so lonely in my life and craving human connection in real life and feeling so isolated. So then when I saw the stuff about the variant, I immediately started spiraling and going like, fuck, like, am I about to like have to re-experience what I just went through for a year of being alone? Like, I don't know if I can do it for another year. So I actually, Rachel, this, but I'm like looking to reconnect with a therapist. I have a session with my beloved therapist from like my teenage years all through my 20s. I'm seeing her later this week for just a touch base session because I was like, I need to see someone that knows everything about me already that I can just check in
Yeah.
with. So that way, when I go back to Texas, I can find somebody, because I just realized my anxiety is getting so activated because I'm like, is this just going to be what life is like now? And everything feels pointless. And when I'm feeling like that, I'm like, I need to fucking talk to somebody so that I don't sink in this low point and stay there.
Well, right. That is I'm so glad that you said that. Like, it does feel like pointless, and like, how can I keep doing this every day? Like, how can I keep
Yeah.
showing up? Like, how can I run my business? How can I keep holding space for other people? Like, well, even during the pandemic, I shut down my one-on-one coaching forever.
Yeah.
Like, and I wasn't going to take on any more clients. And we recently just opened it back up because my availability for things opened and expanded. But like, that's a decision that I made with Sarah. And I remember thinking at the time, I can't do this for another day at all. And if that means I lose every single one of my clients and like I don't have a job and you have to go get a job somewhere, like I don't care. I remember
So
just
be
thinking
it.
like, yeah, like I was like, I'll just live off my savings for as long as we can. And like that'll be it. Like I can't, because I can't do it anymore.
Yeah.
Um, and I'm glad
That's
I
how
got,
you know you've hit like low, like you are burnt out or you're
yeah,
real low and you need some extra support.
yeah. And I'm so glad now that like things are different. But it does feel like that, like for me, when I look at my Instagram, I'm like, do I have anything nice to say about anything? Like, I'm not like tender. I am tender, but like, I'm not like, I'm like, we're in the middle of a pandemic still. Like, we are still in the middle of a pandemic. Like, I have so many friends who are in the healthcare industry. Like, it, like, all I hear, like, I talk to you, I talk to my other friends in the industry, I talk to my friends who are in the healthcare industry. Like, for me, in my world, is the most alive thing and real thing that like we could be experiencing still.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't feel over, it doesn't feel close to over. And I don't like, I want to talk, that's what I want to talk about. Like, I want to talk about these things. I even feel like since we started recording, like I feel like I have more space in my chest,
Me too.
like a sense of relief,
I
because
feel so much calmer.
yeah, like I feel like, and I was so nervous like before this podcast, because I just feel like it's so much easier here for me to talk about everything, because we can talk about the nuance of things. We can like really dive
Mhm.
into things. Whereas on Instagram, it's like we have these like pockets of like 1 second, and like maybe a handful of people are going to read it, and maybe a handful of people are going to resonate with that, and maybe a handful of people, like 1% of those people are going to become a client. And it just feels like everything is dependent on growing and clients on Instagram.
Yeah.
And here it feels like there's room for conversation.
And humanity.
Yeah, and humanity.
And I get it. Like I also have the very human desire and tendency to bypass how hard this all is. Like there are
Mhm.
so many times that I just want to like run around and pretend that none of this fucking happened and that it's not still happening and that I can just like live life. And it is very real. So if people listening have felt that way, there's nothing to be ashamed of. Like, again, this is so fucking hard. We do not have a blueprint of how to navigate this, even just on the emotional level. So I don't know. There needs to be nuanced conversations around it where people have space to express the full range of all that they're feeling, because it's a lot. Like, it's a lot. And there's a lot of moments of like, what, where I'm just like, what the fuck is going on? Like, what is life even going to look like over the next 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years? Like, and then I just go, no, I can't look out that far. Like, I can't look that far out because I'll just like curl up in a ball because I can't see. Like, I feel like I can't see anything. So I have to just look
Yeah.
at like one foot in front of the other, like one thing at a time, like baby steps, because I can't even look. Like when people are like, what's like your 5 year plan? I'm like, don't fucking talk to me. I don't fucking know.
Oh, I know. I hate when people are like, "What's your goal? What's your goal for the year?" And I'm like, "The fuck if I know." Like,
Yeah.
I don't buy into I don't buy into that. Um,
Me neither.
um, Pema Chodron wrote the book When Things Fall Apart,
Yeah.
and she says, even if you can only sit with the hot loneliness for 1.6 seconds today, when yesterday it was one, that's the journey of the warrior.
Oh my God. Yeah, I love that. I love it.
Yeah.
And I think about it. Listen, and this is like really hard when you hold space for other people professionally. We talked about this last time. It's like you talk about doing all the things, it's very different than doing them yourself.
Mhm.
And so I'm like, I have to tell myself all the time, like, Alyssa, if you don't sit your ass down for a second and feel your feelings, you're going to explode. Like, you know what to do. And it is like, it really is like, I don't have to sit down and do a 20-minute guided visualization to heal my fucking inner child one more fucking time. It's like, can I just sit with the absolute heartbreak I'm feeling in this moment for 3 seconds?
Yeah.
Can I do it? That's all I
Yeah.
need to do. And that gets to be enough, but I can't not do it. I will explode.
I got 1.6 tattooed on my hand.
I didn't know
Um,
that.
yeah, a couple of years ago when I was going through this, well, more than a couple of years ago, like 5 years ago when I was going through this like really terrible breakup.
Mm-hmm.
And I just remember telling myself like 1.6, 1.6, 1.6. And like I think that's how I stayed alive this year too. Like just telling myself 1.6, 1.6, 1.6. Like if I can sit in the hot loneliness. And I think I
Wow.
mean it helped me.
You know what? I think I told you this too, Rachel. Is like I realized at one point how much I was struggling when I told Chris, I said, sometimes I'm staying up really, really late. Like I'm talking like 2, 3 a.m. Okay. And I was like, I'm staying up really, really late so that I sleep later, so that the day is shorter without you home.
Mm.
Like, because I'm so lonely and I want the days to be shorter right now because for me to get up early, it's too much time. It's like it's too much time during
Yeah.
daylight. It felt safer to be up at nighttime, just kind of curled up watching TV. Like I wasn't working. I wasn't like up, like I'll work late into the night. It was just like something about it being dark outside felt right to be awake. But then I wouldn't want to get up in the morning because I didn't want the days to feel too long. And that's when I was like, okay, like this is not where this is suffering. And I can't stay here for too long. It's dangerous for me to stay here for too long. And that was a direct result of living through a pandemic.
Yeah. You told me that and I I've been going to sleep like earlier and earlier and earlier. Like sometimes I'm even like asleep at like 7:30.
Wow, I'm so jealous. It's my dream.
Well, and then I sleep until like 7 and
Okay.
I'm like forcing myself to sleep and I'm like
Mm,
I'm tired when I'm like going to sleep, but like my psychiatrist didn't really know much about it, but when I saw my doctor, she said sometimes we sleep to avoid things and I was like, I don't do that. And then I thought about it and it's like I'm forcing myself to sleep in as late as I possibly can,
yeah.
going to sleep early because I just want the day to be done.
Yes.
I wake up and I like almost grieve like the night. Like I want the night back. Like I want to be asleep.
Yep.
And that's like I woke up this morning and I told Sarah that like I'm sad that I'm awake. Not that I wanted to be dead, but like I just wanted to be like not participating in the day.
Not conscious, like sleeping.
Yeah.
Sleeping is like mini
Yeah.
death.
Yeah. I want a mini death. Um and it just like and I definitely think that's a result of the pandemic. Like
Yeah.
and it just like there are so many pockets of like alive deaths that we like experience throughout our
Yep.
day as a result of the pandemic. And I am so sad at many of the pieces of my life and what it looks like now. It feels more human in many ways. Like
Mm.
it's like everything is to the bone. Like I can touch it. Like it's like been ripped open. It's like someone's come in and like destroyed everything. And like now I'm left with like pieces. And in a way, it kind of feels like a beautiful piece of art. Like I can touch things more like, when you're like so anxious that you kind of like reach a point where you're like, you forget what you were anxious about and now you're not anxious about it because you've been like sweating so much, you've been experiencing like the bodily sensations of everything. Like
Yes.
it almost feels like that. Like all of my worst nightmares have happened.
Yeah.
And now I'm just left with like this very human Rachel who like has no room for performing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, there's like no false pretenses here. Like you just don't have the energy to perform. You're just like stripped down to your bare essence of existence, however you are.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
I'm also like toying with how do I create pockets of joy and aliveness, and like in the moments that I'm really struggling, I want to like vomit at even that like phrase, but I'm like, I have to. It's, how do I say it? Like, it's too easy for me to just sit in lows, to sit in like, cause I'm like, I can sit with the heavy stuff. Like I sat with people whose children died for years. That was my work.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, okay, Alyssa, like, I'm really good at sitting in like low, dark spaces. What would it be like to not to bypass them? I can't. I never will because I physically cannot. I can't stomach it. But what does it mean if I'm too quick to cling to the dark stuff and sit there? And
Mm.
what does it mean even if I baby crawl? And that's why like I dance. I dance every day. Like I have to. It is like explosive joy to move my body to music. And that if that's my pocket of 3 minutes of joy and that's all I get in that day, I have to do it. And it has to be enough. And like I try every day to find those things. I think sometimes on social media it can come off as like I just live joyfully, constantly just running around dancing and laughing and like being naughty all the time. And like that's a big part of my life, but a lot of it has been like sitting in dark spaces. So it is like takes a lot of effort. It's like a revolution for me to move towards joy and hope because that does not come naturally to me at this point. I'm still working on that.
Mm. I feel like a sense of like, I love that you can do that and it feels inspiring. And I also feel like so sad. Like, I don't, like, nothing feels joyful to me.
Yeah.
Like, there's not like throughout my day. I mean, Cooper brings me joy. He's like so cute right now. Like, he's 9 and
Hmm.
he's just like, I look at him and I hear him playing his video games and he's like belly laughing. And I like don't really understand what's funny about a video game, but like, I love that for him. And like that brings me like pockets of joy, but
Yeah,
there's nothing, and like this podcast brings me joy,
me
but
too.
there's nothing that like when we're not doing the podcast, when we're not like when Cooper isn't laughing, it's just like I really like listening to you. I really feel like, and I don't want to say like I really could do a better job of like being happy,
No, it can't
but
be turned into like a task.
no, but like I really want to bring some awareness to my life
Hmm.
because I would like to experience at least like 1% of like how I experienced life pre-COVID.
I feel that so deeply. I feel that so deeply. And I actually have been thinking a lot about what you said. I think 2 episodes on our episode about having anxiety of like,
Mm-hmm.
what would I be like without my anxiety? Like, what would I be like without that? And I've been asking myself that question over and over and over
Mm.
again lately of like, what would it be like? And not to banish it, but like, it makes me sad. And I'm like, how can I reach for even like a micro dose of joy? Like, I think of it as like micro dosing. Like, I can't force myself to just like take on this joyful demeanor and essence and like be bubbly and run around like I love everything. Like, no way. No, like it's not going to happen.
Yeah.
But I've been sitting a lot with like, okay, how do I not, when am I just feeling sad and when am I clinging to hopelessness because it's more comforting and comfortable for me to live in a state of hopelessness, and actually striving for any sort of joy or hope feels too threatening to me because it can be taken away and I'm too scared. And I've had to sit with that a lot of like, why is suffering my comfort and what do I do with this while also
Yeah.
not bypassing what I'm feeling, right? It's super nuanced and I have no answers right now. I'm still figuring it out. It's something I support my clients in doing, and it's something that I'm constantly doing myself all the time.
Yeah. Oh gosh, this pandemic,
I know
this
that went
like
really
test of
deep.
humanness. No, it was good. It was really good. It was really
Yeah,
good.
I've never felt more human in my entire life.
I feel that.
Like I feel very, very, very human, like very sometimes animalistic in how I'm existing. Like I'm like eat,
Yeah.
sleep, fuck,
Yes.
the end. Like that's all I have capacity for.
Yeah. I feel like old.
Yeah.
And not like in the like how the millennials are like, I'm so old and I'm like 24.
No,
Like
no.
I feel like old.
Like
Like I feel like
tired.
yeah. Yeah. And I feel like I'm missing like, and I think this as like a teen mom too. Like
Mm,
I had Cooper when I was 18, so I didn't go to college, so I didn't experience like my 20s as like a single person. Um, but and I feel like I like woke up and now I feel like old, just like I've missed out on like life, like what it could have been. And I think that's something too. Like I'm grieving like what this year could have been like.
Yeah.
And I can't imagine it any differently. And my there are so many good things. Like my business popped off.
Oh yeah, I've told you months ago. I was like, I feel like I'm watching you at the like on one of the peaks of your career. Not that this is the peak and then that's it, but like on one of like if you think of like scaling a mountain, there's like multiple
Yeah.
peaks, and I feel like you are just hitting one, and it's so beautiful to watch.
Yeah. It's definitely been a ride. Oh,
Mhm.
I also wrote my book during the
Yeah.
pandemic. Um, but I wrote it and then I had to rewrite it because it was like it just didn't make sense for the pandemic. Like it
Yeah.
didn't make sense for like being a human in the pandemic. So like I rewrote it actually in the most severe moment of like my depression.
Mm.
I don't know how, like I don't know how. I do not know how I did that. Probably because everyone paid for it and I had to get it out. So
Yeah.
like people pre-bought it and it was one book. And then by the time that I was done with it, it was another book. And I think that's the only way that it got out. But yeah, it's definitely been like have been pockets of like big, beautiful things, but I feel like I haven't even been able to like fully like be in those big, beautiful things because just like the weight of this year.
Makes so much sense. I
Yeah.
mean, it just does.
Yeah. But people asked us a lot of really good questions that
They
I want to bring
did.
up.
They did. They asked so many good ones.
Let me pull them up.
I have one right up here. Do you want me to?
Yeah, pull it up. Go ahead.
Okay. So I was asked a question. Um, like any ways to cope with COVID related anxiety on top of other mental health disorders like PTSD, generalized anxiety disorder, etc. Admits also working with the public. Yeah. So this person works in public facing work, has, COVID related anxiety on top of other stuff. I'm assuming they do, or they're asking for someone who does. And what I would say is get as much fucking support as you can, professionally and personally. Um, you know, if you have to continue working and like working with people, and you need to make sure that you're getting as much support as you can. Like there's no shame in like Rachel, you just said you're in a doing therapy 2 times a week. Like
Yeah.
you got to do whatever you have to do right now to take care of yourself, and understanding that there's nothing wrong with you for experiencing increased levels. Like COVID related anxiety is very real, and if that's compounding other things that we're already dealing with, like everything's going to feel bigger than it typically does for you. So just having that understanding, being super compassionate with yourself, and like tending to yourself. Like I will say this 1,000 times. I feel like it's my answer for a lot of things, but like tending to yourself the way you would someone else you love as much as you can. And also asking for other people to pour into you, like shamelessly asking for it, like asking people to make you dinner, asking people to get you groceries, like asking someone to run you a bath or brush your hair. Like I don't, whatever the fuck it is, like, so that you get to have those moments of like, I'm being taken care of. Because our nervous systems are jacked up. So like whatever you can do to regulate.
I co-sign on that.
Yeah.
That's my favorite thing that you say. I co-sign on that.
Do I say that?
Yeah, you said that.
I didn't even know.
Yeah, I got it from you.
Love it.
Okay, someone said, how are you meeting yourself where you're at when you feel like you've lived 34 lives?
Oh my God. First, maybe you have lived 34 lives.
Yes. Haven't we this last year and a half? Oh my God. I How do you meet yourself where you're at when you feel like you've lived 34 lives? I think going back to what we just said about the 1.6 seconds, like I truly have had to take this year and one moment at a time, and
Yeah.
one moment at a time, and one moment at a time, and nothing more and nothing less, sometimes less, I guess. Um, but that is the only way I know how to exist and how to meet myself, is if I'm meeting myself in the current live moment and not who I once was a year and a half ago,
Yeah.
who I think that I could be if I just had enough energy because it's a new week. Like, no, that's not going to happen.
No. It really is like in that exact, you have to meet yourself in that exact moment, and not to like get super out there with it, but like in every single moment, what you need and who you are is shifting. And not to get morbid, but like we're always like dying in little ways and like moving closer to the very human experience of death.
Yeah.
And so, like, how can you meet yourself in this exact moment with what you need in this moment? And sometimes that means as baseline as like your physical animal needs of like, are you drinking water? Are you eating snacks? Like, are you taking a moment to fucking breathe into your low belly? Are you just like anxious chest breathing and like just trying to get through the day? And I will also say creating pockets of escape, right? Because sometimes we can make this like, I've got to be with myself in every moment. It's fucking exhausting. So, like, can you
Mm-hmm.
create moments where you don't have to like sit in your shit, where you get to have a moment and like laugh at the levity of like being human?
Yeah. I love that.
Whether that's watching a show that brings you comfort or calling a friend who you know you can laugh about really inappropriate things together, or
Right.
like whatever it is to take like I have to take a break from myself regularly because it's like I'm like, oh, this is too fucking much. I need a break from me. And I take them and I don't make it mean
Yeah.
anything.
And you don't make it mean anything. That's
Mm-mm.
good.
Yeah.
That's really good. Let's see what else people asked us
Yeah.
here. Um, Someone said it's hard to work with a sense of pointlessness that comes with the grief of all that's been lost. Question is how to stay connected to what makes us feel alive amidst the chaos and hardship.
Mm. First, what does make you feel alive? You gotta like I would ask myself
Yeah,
that, and know that might change all the time. But like what does make you feel alive first? You got to know what those things are.
such a hard question. I
It
was at
really
the
is.
doctor's office a couple weeks ago and they were like, "What do you do that brings you joy?" And I was like, "Fuck me. I don't know. Nothing." And it was like such a depressing. I was like, "I like to write," which does bring me joy.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I think I echo what you said. I think like knowing like what does make you feel alive,
Mm-hmm.
um, starting there.
Yeah. Like starting there, and whatever it is, if it's like, I mean, truly, it can be the smallest things. It doesn't matter. Like for me, it just like give you some like full frontal orgasms make me feel alive because I feel like
Yeah,
I'm dying when I have them in like the most glorious way. Like I think it
yeah.
like in somewhere I read, I God, I'm gonna butcher it, but it's like orgasms are like 1,000 tiny deaths or something. Like I've talked about this before, like, or
Ooh,
someone that's not for me. I read that somewhere. It's like a translation of something, but death and sex, like orgasms and dying feel like two huge acts of surrender. Like
wow.
when I orgasm, you're out of control, right? Like it's like though for those moments that that's happening, my brain is offline. It is
Yeah,
glorious. And I feel like I'm just like falling through liminal space. And it's just like the loveliest thing. So like me and my vibrators are tight as fuck right now. Like there are moments where I'm like, I don't feel anything or I feel disconnected. I'm like, okay, we're going to go have an orgasm, even when I really don't want to, because I know for me right now, that makes me feel very alive
yeah,
because it feels like a death and a rebirth all at the same time. So I do that. That's my thing.
yeah. Tiny little deaths. I love
Tiny little
that.
death.
That's beautiful.
Thank you.
Let's see if we have time for one more
Okay.
question. Um, Someone said, not a question, but a thought. I know the pandemic has permanently changed me, and I'm scared for that, to feel like I'm going to mostly feel so awful forever. Also, it was because of the pandemic I was able to move closer to becoming full time in my job. So I have this weird back and forth of feeling oddly grateful in some ways and so resentful too.
Wow. That makes sense.
Oh, that makes so much sense. Like, just kind of like what we were just talking about. Like, I feel very grateful that my business has grown so much, and I feel rage and like anger and sadness and grief and discombobulated and so far away from myself and in moments so close to myself. Like, I really just think that making spaces where there is room for the full scale of human emotion, even if it's 1.6 seconds, even if it's only on this podcast, um we should do like maybe like some like breathing together, like
I
as we
know.
intro our podcast. Like maybe we should do that for the next
I
episode.
know. For just at least just for us. My God.
I know.
To calm down.
um but that's hard. But I think that the more that we can have conversations, the more that we can begin to be in our current reality
Yeah.
instead of being in resistance of our current reality.
Yes, I love that. Like to resist something only ever prolongs it. It really does. Like I know when we resist feeling the
Yeah.
feelings, and that question is such a good one. It's like, um, one thing I always tell people is like, you are not, and myself, oh my God, all the time, like, you will not feel like this forever. Like, that is true. It might feel like it for way longer than you want, but you will feel other things at different moments. Like, this will not be, you will not feel like shit forever. We are all forever altered from this, whether people want to act like they
Yeah.
are or not. We all are forever changed from this. And so you're
Mm-hmm.
not alone in that experience, and you won't feel shitty forever. And I think one of the things that can help us is admitting it out loud and like asking us that question, like, are there people in your life that you can express this to verbally that will affirm you? When I'm able to say some of my like my biggest fears to people out loud, it like takes the air out of them a little bit. And in that moment, I feel a sense of relief. So like encouraging
Yeah,
people to do that with people that are safe to do that with.
absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah. Well, this has been a beautiful episode. I'm really glad that we had this conversation.
me too. Y'all, it might have been a really intense thing for me to talk about my menstrual blood. I'm a little concerned about it, but we're gonna like just go with it. So
Okay.
I hope people still love me after this, even if they think that's the weirdest thing they've ever heard in their fucking
I still love
lives.
you.
Thank you, Rachel. I love you too. Otherwise, this was a
Love
wonderful conversation.
you. It has been. And we just want to say that we are so thankful for your reviews. Reviews mean a lot on podcasts. Um, and we really want to do some big things with this podcast. We have a lot of ideas brewing for what we want to come from this. So if you love the podcast, leaving a review is like giving us a big hug and really like promoting the podcast in the best way possible. So that would mean the absolute world to us. And if you know someone who would love the podcast, we would love if you could send it their way. Your friend, your sibling, your neighbor, whoever.
Whoever, we love all of the support. Like it means the world. Like truly, we're
Yeah.
two people that read every single thing and like eat it up. So thank you so much. And we love y'all.
Thank you, everybody. All right. We hope you have a beautiful day.
Bye.
Bye.